One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. Today on One Question is Towson Athletic Director Tim Leonard. Tim, I want you to think back. When was the first time you had sport oversight as an associate AD or senior associate? What school, what sport?
It really wasn't all that long ago. It was when I got to SMU, working with Steve Orsini, and I had some of the country club sports, if you will, primarily men's and women's tennis that I was working with.
Well, and that leads me into the question, of course, of, coming up through the industry, you were a fundraiser, you were an external ops guy, places like, you mentioned SMU, but UCF, Boise State, Illinois State. When you started to think, okay, the next step in my progression here is I've got to have some hands-on sport oversight, or some people now are calling it sport facilitator experience. How did you prepare for that conversation with Steve? But more so, how did you prepare yourself to understand how to deal with a head coach and his or her program on a daily basis?
Sure. Well, it's kind of interesting. When I first went to SMU, it was a unique situation. I'd worked with Steve in the past, and he and I had been talking about getting together. He had gone out from UCF about a year and a half before that, maybe 2 years. And we had talked about some opportunities, and I had said, you know what, I think I want to start looking to be an AD. He said, well, why don't you come out here? I'll try to do some things to assist you on that. And obviously one of those things was sport oversight. But in terms of, what was I doing to prepare for it? I don't know if I did anything special out of the way. I mean, I had a very good relationship with a lot of my coaches at UCF, and in particular, George O'Leary and I were very good friends. I spent a lot of time with George. I almost daily with him. And George probably taught me more about dealing with coaches and what it is coaches are looking for and how they want to be, how they want their administration to work with them, and what it is, how coaches are thinking and all the rest of that. And I use those, probably draw from that today more than anything else that I've done. And so, that had nothing to do with sport oversight. That just had to do with working with your coaches, and getting to understand them and working with them. And that all started from a fundraising perspective, not from a sport oversight.
Yeah. And have you come to find that maybe the way a football coach approaches the relationship and what he needs from an athletic director is vastly different than, say, a head men's or women's tennis coach, or are they generally the same?
I think with the good coaches, they're generally the same. I mean, obviously they're going to be different because they're different type of sports. The funding is different, all those types of things. But it's good coaches are demanding. If you're an administrator, they can be difficult. But I always say my best coaches are the ones that are the biggest pain in the tuchus that I have. Right, because they're always they're pushing you, and they're trying to get more for the program, and they're as long as they're up front and they're clear about it and they're coming to you, that's what you want. And yeah, that can be difficult. Yeah, they can be a pain, but in a good way. That, to me, that's the sign of a good coach.
Did you, and do you still today, the structure of your communication with your head coaches that you oversee? Is that a weekly meeting? If so, where, when, how long, or is it very fluid because of how things develop throughout a calendar year and a season?
Yeah, for me it's very fluid, and I do it a little bit differently. I actually have hands-on with 3 of my sports where we don't have a sports supervisor. I am their direct contact on a daily basis, and that's football, basketball, and women's lacrosse here at Towson. And during the season, I make sure to, every Monday, my goal is we sit down and at the end of the day, that way it's given our football coach a chance to decompress after a game, whether it's a hard-fought victory or a tough loss. The emotions are gone. They're already focused in on the next week, and we can just sit down and talk about issues that are confronting him, whether it's issues with the team, if there's academic issues, character issues, whatever it is. And we just try to talk then. And then, rarely a day goes by where I'm not having a phone call or I'm texting back and forth with my the coaches that I deal with, whether it's Pat, Rob, or Sonia. My basketball coach, on the other hand, especially now because we're in the same building, rarely a day goes by where I don't pop my head into his office and just say hello, check in on him. He and I have a very fluid relationship. We're constantly in communication with each other, just constant. Yeah. And I like it that way. I hope that the coaches like it that way. They seem to. They don't tell me any different. But, yeah, I really enjoy working with all of our coaches. We've got great ones here, and they push you. They're going to make you a better ID because they're going to push you all the time.
That leads to an interesting question of, other than just direct feedback, which head coaches are, I know, comfortable doing in many cases, but how do you measure the effectiveness of how you're interfacing with them? Are there 360-degree reviews within the department annually, or how do you kind of get feedback beyond just the face-to-face communication?
Well, there's really a couple of things. I mean, yes, we'll do at the end of each season, I'll sit down and try to do that like immediately. If the last game is played on Saturday, either Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, we'll sit down. It might be for an hour. It could be 4 or 5 hours, and review the season. What changes are we going to make, and deal with immediate issues regarding the performance of the program that year. In terms of some of the bigger things, we do this with all of our sport programs. We try to sit down twice a year with each head coach, with my entire senior staff, and go through the entire program, kind of soup to nuts, using as a guideline our university or our athletic department's strategic plan. Right, and I encourage all of our coaches then, I want them to have their own strategic plan just for their sport. And then I've given them a template, a guideline to follow that says, okay, here are our 6 themes, and here's our core values and all those types of things to use to make your own. And then we go through each principle, each theme, and see, okay, how are we doing? Are we doing well? Are we not doing well? What areas do we need to focus on? And then that way the whole team sits down with the coach. The coach knows they've got the whole support of the department. And then our whole department understands what that specific coach's needs are. So like I say, we do that twice a year, try to do a before and after.
So every sport, every head coach, the entire senior staff.
Yep.
Where did you develop that framework?
Just here, kind of came up with it as we were going through our strategic plan, and then started talking with our coaches. And some coaches felt like they weren't being heard enough, and they wanted to have time in front of the AD or the staff, and it just kind of morphed out of what we were trying to do as a staff. And that's really where it came from. It wasn't anything that I read about, heard somebody else was doing and all this. It was just kind of organic, and we decided to do it internally with the help of some of my key staff members, Tricia Brandenburg and Will Huff. Really, between the three of us, we decided that would be an effective thing to do. It can be very labor intensive.
Yeah.
I can assure you that. And it seems like and we do those types of meetings on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. And there's plenty of Tuesdays and Thursdays where I'm getting in here thinking, I just want some time to do some stuff. And, you're going to have this hour-long meeting, and you're like, am I really ready for this? And you got to get ready. You got to be mentally ready, because the coach is going to be mentally ready. And for some of those sports, hey, look, this is important to them. This is their one chance to sit down with the entire staff, and they're going to bring you everything they think they need to have for the department and to make them successful and so forth. So you got to be fresh and be ready.
Yeah. Is that so? You've had that in place for how many years now, Towson? Your entire
probably tenure? No. We've probably been doing it now for about 2 years. Interesting.
Yeah, I'll be curious to talk to you 2 years from now and see how you've just to see if you're doing the exact same thing or what you've learned in 2 more years of that. That does seem very labor intensive, and I'm sure others probably do something similar, but I haven't heard directly that every single head coach with the entire senior staff twice a year gets that kind of platform. That's a good opportunity for them to have some really good in-depth conversations about their program, I'm sure.
I hope so. I hope it is. That's why we're doing it, and I want to keep that, right? You don't want to just pulse out and just say, you know what, I'm tired, I can't do it anymore. No, you got to keep doing it.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Do you keep who keeps the minutes, and do you go back and review the minutes from the last conversation every 6 months to know what the pain points were, or do you just generally know those?
Yeah, no, we try to keep that down, and now the sport, it's kind of a combination. Each one's a little bit different. Sport oversight will do that, or a lot of times Tricia or Will is doing that. But yeah, we try to follow up and say, we have goals for the season, both in terms of win loss, and academic performance, character issues, community service hours, APR scores, all those types of things. So we'll review at the end of the year, and then we set goals for new ones. So we have some metrics that we follow up on. And then we sit down and figure out what those metrics are going to be moving forward as well.
Do we get to the level of talking contract specifics if somebody's looking for a extension or a raise or something for their assistants, or is that a separate conversation?
That would be a separate I don't do that in front of the whole staff. That's we just get in, but we do talk about win-loss goals, where we want to be, what are our metrics, APR, all that stuff. The whole staff talks about it. And it's not meant for anybody to feel exposed. In fact, just the opposite. What I want are the coaches to understand that you got a whole team over here, people behind you, trying to help you. And then the other part of that is I want my staff to understand that if our coaches don't hit these goals, we've failed. Right? It wasn't just the coaches that may not have hit their goal. We didn't hit our goal. And we're all in this thing together. Yeah. Because I do get frustrated at times where I feel like people just all they're worried about is their job, their own specific task. And yes, that's good. You need to be worried about that. But we're a department, right? And we get evaluated on how well we do as a whole. And so we got to make sure that our coaches are winning ball games and graduating kids and raising money and all of those things. And if they're not doing that, it's not one person's fault. It's all of ours fault.
That's interesting.
And if they're successful, it's all of us. It's not just one person.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.